He's so good.
Yeah.
Have lots of books.
Well, that's one of the, you got it. How important is something like a book sale?
I just.
Do you mind if you open it? I was looking right here. I was trying to look up. I was trying to look up. Yeah, I thought it was on there too, but I think it was on the presentations. So let me, I think, but now that you say that, I think maybe when presentations will be in the teams, because I guess, you know, so they're shared there.
Yeah.
So, because I was looking for the chart, because I thought more questions might be coming. So originally it was looking for the chart, but let me see if I can find. I know which slide you're showing. Shark James team now. Good thing. Yeah.
You don't
Folder right here. And it is like right here. Just.
You're on. You want me to flip this around so you can?
Sure, so I'm not like out of the screen. Oh, oh wow, okay, there I am. So if I'm over here, like the weather, I'm right, okay. Should we get going, you think? Okay. Can you all hear me? Does that work? Great. Okay. Well, good evening. Thanks for everyone for coming. My name is Suzanne Ingarano. I'm a principal with Ashley McGraw Architects. Also with me is Deanna Hine. She's with Ashley McGraw as well. And we've been working on a planning study and schematic design for the Bethlehem Public Library. So tonight we're here to meet with you all, gather some information, share out what's happened so far, and really just have a dialogue and answer questions as we might be able to. So I guess before we jump in, I'm curious, who has seen any of the board meetings regarding this project so far? Is anybody familiar with what's been happening? Yes? Okay, we are going to kind of take you back through the process for anybody who hasn't been to any of those board meetings, and it's kind of a build upon that. There's been a lot of effort in the last year or so, kind of showcasing what or reviewing and summarizing what has been done, and then showcasing the design for feedback and comments. So to get us started, I'd like to all get us kind of in the right frame of mind to think about this project. So I'd like you all to think about, what is your favorite memory involving the Bethlehem Public Library? So just imagine that for a moment. Can I get any volunteers to share their favorite memory? Yeah.
Sure. So bringing my two boys here for different activities, story time.
Yeah, so bringing your kids here, that's a great one. Does anybody else have a favorite memory?
Well, great staff.
Great staff.
Oh, it's very great.
Yeah,
And they help.
helpful. Okay,
And again, I always brought my children here too. It was a great place.
wonderful.
There was a lot of offerings.
Yes, a lot of offerings. Was there one? Yep, go ahead.
Oh, it's a beautiful facility.
Beautiful facility. Yeah, okay. So all of these things that you're talking about are things that we want to make sure that the quality of the new library has. So how can the library reimagining support those things that you just mentioned, as well as other things that we set out to do. So in terms of tonight, we'd like to start with informing you. So kind of, again, what has that process been? Where are we now? Where are we going? Then also to reflect on that. So get a lot of opportunity for you all to participate and think and provide feedback on some of the stuff that we've done. And then lastly, to contribute, there's some activities around the room that I'd love for you to participate in at the end of the presentation. So diving in, from Ashley McGraw, we are a bigger team than just myself and Deanna. And so just kind of letting you know that there's a lot of people hard at work with a lot of experience and a lot of years of expertise on projects. related to learning environments and places for communities. We also have an MEP engineering, structural engineering, landscape design, all part of the team to make sure that this comes together in a way that is feasible and can get constructed. So kind of taking you back down through the process, where we started was in September of 2022 with a planning study. The library board engaged us to look at what are all the opportunities, what is needed, what does the library need in terms of function, operations, maintenance, programming, safety, all of these types of things. And the ask was, we have a couple of ideas, but we don't really know where to go with them. So what are the options? How can we explore them and help kind of move into an understanding of where to go from there? So starting in September, we had some initial board meetings, some discovery sessions. We had a couple of other board meetings and worked with stakeholders to determine, what the library needed and produced some options that were reviewed. Right now we're in schematic design, which is where you take the concept that was determined, the scope and the concept that was determined in the planning study, and start to build more detail on that. And every phase along the way, we continue to build more detail on that, as well as get there's options, get some decisions made along the way. So we're very early in the process. There are design concepts that you'll be seeing, but we're in a place where we'd love to hear all of your feedback and refine some of those things. Respond to concerns as needed as possible, and really make sure that the library is serving your needs and authentic to your community. So here's a brief kind of summary of, as part of the planning study, we produced a document, and there was in the executive summary sort of 4 main points that we set out to do. So the first was the ask, the call to action, is that the library is seeking the opportunity to update the building, streamline operational efficiencies, and enhance accommodations to the community, which involve providing more space, opportunities, and easier access to the building. So that was first and foremost. Second is what to do with 59 Borthwick. So that is the house that's adjacent to the library. The library acquired that property, and it was, do we knock it down and put parking there? Do we put a building there? Do we restore that building? Not really sure. Lots of different options. So part of our study was to explore that. Also, to determine an approach for where the priorities lie. What impacts could be made by engaging with stakeholders in a way to collaborate and ensure that the design was the foundation of priorities and goals. So really engaging with the community and your stakeholders. And then lastly is to continue that conversation. So making sure that all along the way, we're working with administration, staff, library community, and the community. And so that your needs are what is served through this project. So as we moved into the details of this study, a couple of things that we wanted to make sure we touched on was understanding the history and culture of the library. So we as Ashley McGraw, we are new to your community. We wanted to really understand who you are, what your community represents, the culture of your community, the culture of the library, and how your community interacts with that. So really getting to understand those aspects rather than making any assumptions. We wanted to have an understanding of that. We also researched and analyzed the existing facility. So looking at the architecture, the infrastructure, various systems, are they still in fine use? Are they something that needs a little bit of maintenance and will be fine? Or is it at the end of its useful life? What is the architectural language? What are some of the problems maybe with operating the building and making sure that we understood all of that? Then we also wanted to make sure that we had a detailed program understanding. So we have the main library, we have children library, we have the community space that you're in now, we have the boardroom, we also have a lot of staff space and back of house space. So understanding what are all of the program spaces that the library currently has, what does it need, and what are those deficiencies and how could that be evolved? Also, we wanted to understand the scope. So we talked a little bit about that. What should the scope be, as well as why is the project happening and sort of that aspiration for the project in the future. And then the vision for that future through stakeholder engagement. and determining critical success factors. So those last couple items around purpose and vision and critical success are things that we're going to visit in a moment here that I'd love your feedback. They are live aspects that the more that we engage, the more that we can add detail, be more specific about it in terms of how it relates to your needs and your community. So making sure that they guide us along the way to a successful project. Also, as part of the planning study, we started looking at initial concepts. So originally, I think we had 3 options of, well, we quickly determined that the library desired more space, community space. Some of the staff needed more space. So we ultimately looked at, with needing more space, where does that come from? So an addition was one of the aspects that we explored. So we looked at various options of where an addition could go, how big should it be, and looked at those first 3 options. The board asked us to kind of hybridize some of those things, look at pushing and pulling those ideas. So we ended up with 5, and through some pros and cons exploration of each of those options, the board ultimately selected one. We actually call it split the middle. We name all of these aspects because it helps us to remember them, but there's also intention to, and you'll see it a little bit later, that this addition is sort of splitting up through the site so that it makes things a little bit more accessible as well as safe in the parking area. And I'll share more on that in a little bit. And so we wanted to make sure that those concepts were really rooted in some thoughtful kind of understanding of the pros and cons and would act as our way forward. Moving into schematic design, we're looking at understanding, the existing program, the desired program, and what are those deficiencies. Then taking that to lay it out within the interior of the space and understanding where should offices go, how many are there, how big should the stack space be? How big is the children's library? Is that big enough? How big should it be? And so forth. And then we also wanted to understand other things. So site development, understanding not only is it parking, but it's green space. It's stormwater management. There's other aspects to that that we'll get into a little bit more. And then also, with any renovation and addition, making sure that we understand the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection, structure. So all of those things are at play and we're working on now in relationship to the selected overarching option, but we're looking at how do we make that come more to life based on your needs. So all of that being said, all of the different conversations we've had, we've looked at gathering that understanding of the vision for the future, the critical success factors, and we work to synthesize those into a purpose statement. And then we also synthesize those into guiding principles that are a little bit more actionable. The purpose statement is a very high level, overarching drive and aim for the project. So it's something that doesn't necessarily have you should do this or that. It's more, this is what the outcome of the project should be. And the further we go in the process, it's about understanding the details and potential solutions within those. And as we continue on to define more detail around each of them. So I'd like to share with you the purpose statement and the guiding principles and get some initial feedback on it. Does it resonate with you? Does it not resonate? Is it missing something? Is it in line with your thinking? Is it counter to your thinking? So we'd love your feedback to make sure that we're all, as the entire community, has some understanding of that direction as a whole. So the purpose statement for this project is to position the Bethlehem Public Library as a community resource that is accessible to all, offering modern programming in a mindful environment that's nestled within the fabric of the community, designed in a way that's welcoming, simple to navigate, modern and adaptable to a variety of programs, both inside the library and throughout the site, optimizing the library so that both patrons and staff have cohesive environments to suit their evolving needs and to support the next generation of collaboration, discovery, and learning. So I'll let you just ruminate on that for a little bit.
Excuse me.
Yes.
So as I read that purpose statement, that could actually function as the existing purpose statement for the library that we have. And so, as I was listening to you give your introductory, it wasn't clear to me exactly how it was identified that there was a need for this.
Yeah.
I mean, an overarching multi-million-dollar need, not
Right,
some kind of a small need.
right,
And that purpose statement is very much in line with what we have right now.
yes,
There's nothing up there that I could see that you could say, oh yeah, we don't have.
sure. That's a great point in this sense that I think that is what the library is doing, all of that to the best of their ability within the constraints that they have. So for instance, I think I agree with you. The library is able to do things beyond, I think, the walls of the library, because the library staff and what they do for the community is really trying to do more than what they can with what they have. So thinking about how many times have you tried to come, and maybe you or anybody else who's watching or listening have been interested in participating in a community event and you were turned away because there wasn't room. So this space holds about 109 people, and that is the largest interior, and that's chairs or standing, not tables, not other activities or equipment. So thinking about if there are community events that you would like to go to, you might be limited by the capacity of this room, and it's the only room. So that's one example of how the library currently does the best that they can to serve the community with this room, but there are limitations to that and the extent. So I think I agree with you in the sense that, yes, the library does this, but they would like to enhance this, do better, do more. Another example is that the library staff, we had a library staff member here earlier who noted that there are over 70 staff that operate the library. The staff space is tiny. They share space, they're working in unideal conditions. So if they're the reason that the library can function and achieve anywhere close to this, they're doing so kind of at the detriment to their own abilities to do that work. They're really going the extra mile to make sure those things happen. So the community space and the staff space, those are two examples of where, yes, it happens now, but it could be done in a much better way.
So you're saying that the library is kind of like grown to a point where it's at its outer boundaries.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. But very astute, yeah. So any other comments? Does it resonate, not resonate?
I think that's exactly what I thought when we got there too. Yeah, that does seem to be what we do here. And I guess I started wondering about the need for this much larger. If actually, I looked at it online and I did skip to that $23 million price tag, which was it was shocking. And about 20 years ago, it was a big proposal for a big change that never it was voted down. And I think that everyone who comes to this is going to be asking these questions. And even that number of 7 is a very large step. Now, they can't all be full time, right? Because they're filling all day, up to 9 o'clock.
Right.
But how many of those people are full-time employees?
Right. I don't have those statistics on hand, so I don't want to misspeak. But there are a lot of full-time staff as well.
Yeah. But there must be shelters and maintenance people, and a lot of people, right?
Yes, and well, I would also say maintaining this building is quite an effort. There's a lot in terms of, it's not just janitorial, there's a lot of upkeep, there's a lot of serving, kind of carting books around. There's a lot that goes into making sure that it's a well-oiled machine from what you engage with.
And how about the population? Has the community, I think in your online information, it's something 27,000. Now, can you tell us how much the community has grown in the last 5 years, say? Those.
That's a great question. I don't know those numbers. And I think the point is we've had 2 other sessions like this today, and we've gotten some questions like that. And I think we owe more of that data to support some of this. We've worked a lot based on kind of conversations. And I think we're at a point we definitely we definitely need to collect that data.
So that seems critical.
Yeah.
I mean, are we serving a much larger population, or is it relatively stable within the library? Within the voting financing
Right.
part of the library territory. Right. Because there's a certain number of people who support the library through their tax dollars. Other people who use the facilities because they're from the Upper Hudson library system, and that's all fine. But if it's being, this need is being seen by members of who come from Albany, or they come from different locations, that's a little bit different than saying, well, you know what? There's 5 new developments in Bethlehem, the number of children, the number for that, have a number for the increase in the population, the people who will actually pay for it. And I think that's always a critical part of a presentation like this, to show us, the community, what is the need here in the town of Bethlehem. And these things don't actually address.
Okay.
They're so basic.
Right.
Definitely. And that to me is kind of the starting of why it was even hopes.
Right.
So it just seems like a lot of practical information. And I haven't read it word for word, but I spent some time going through the online presentation, which is here. And it just seemed like kind of a pie in the sky plan, with an emphasis on space for people to gather. And it started to sound to me more like a community center rather than what people think of as a library.
Right.
And there's lots of things that can be said about both sides. Like libraries are changing, they're evolving, all of that. But is that really what this community wants to see?
Right.
And some of the things which is really flexing, like the library of things. Okay. And looking at that and looking it up online, what that really means is that libraries can get involved in loaning out backpacks, fishing poles. I guess there's some of that now, but games. In this article that explained the library of things, even said things like camping. And the idea that there's people in the library who are going to take back these items, go through every game to see if the pieces are there, the cards are there, and make sure who's cleaning the tent that comes back, the camping gear or the backpack. And all of these things just seem like so out of the range of what people see as library.
Mhm.
And the idea of inventorying those items, maintaining them, keeping them clean, sanitizing them, and loaning them out to other people seems really contrary to everybody's concern for COVID and sanitation and masks. But now we're going to get into being a storehouse for items that in this community, everybody has. Kids have games, people have fishing pools, there's a garage sale everywhere, every weekend. Whatever you don't have, get it at a garage sale, cheap. But so, I mean, that whole concept is, maybe something in a place that's where everyone's impoverished and that the people really could come in and use things like that. That maybe it wouldn't be a library, it would be more like a facility where you just have those things that people can take out, but it's not even a library. So there were just so many things about this in the cafe idea of serving food. I mean, that's another thing, does the library really want to be a restaurant? And most people, I think, would say no, because there's plenty of places out here that are struggling to have people come. Okay, you have something at the library, but you go out to the Four Corners and visit someplace. The idea of then having another place to keep clean and take care of, and meet the standards of the Board of Health. Anytime you serve food, then you have to have the bathrooms.
So all of these concepts, a lot of them are things that the library is looking at in terms of things that the community, various community members have asked for. So however, throughout this process, we are looking at each of those items to look at what are the pros and cons, what's the viability, what are the then required things like staff and sanitation. So for instance, if we could kind of continue through the presentation, some of the efforts around specifically the cafe during the planning study determined that that was not a thing that the library wanted to position themselves at, that maybe it's providing a vending machine with some water or some, a little bit beyond that, which is just a little bit like what they have now. But ultimately the idea of a cafe that came up in the original conversations worked itself through those conversations to say that's not what the library wants to do. So at the time there is no cafe. There is sort of at the moment, and it's still kind of, we're still going through the design. There's an area that kind of mimics what that would provide in terms of community, like that sense of being able to meet with somebody, but there's not a food service or staff component to it.
Well, the other thing is in this community, the town hall is in an old school, which has a big gymnasium that groups can use. High school has a huge facility there. I mean, a lot of this stuff seems very, for this.
So a lot of on the community spaces, and again, we can kind of continue through to like just touch on the specific aspects. The community spaces, and we're working on putting together an understanding of when are the rooms booked and for what, and how many times people are turned away from events, or that community groups are turned away from being able to have their event here. There's just not enough space, whether maybe other places, like for instance, the schools, yes, those are great community resources, but there's limitations on the hours based on when school is in session, based on security. So there are aspects of this project that is looking to not be so redundant that it is meeting a need that isn't necessarily served elsewhere. And that's what we're here to do, is hopefully if you could provide some of your feedback within the activities that we have, we can capture those concerns and vet them further. So
Has your firm worked on other projects?
So our firm is primarily an educational firm. So K-12 and higher education. We're actually the Bethlehem School District architect as well. So we work a lot on these spaces where it's about learning and discovery, which I would say a library is about learning and discovery for all ages beyond K-12 environments. We are also working on other libraries. This is a very large undertaking, so I understand that it's probably more akin to some of our K-12 project work. Yes.
I'd just like to know who are the stakeholders? What we're talking about stakeholders,
Yeah.
Stakeholders have been nominated, have they been meeting?
We have different categories based on what type of information we're looking at. So we have the library trustees, we have the staff members. So we've met with the staff members often, and then we have you all as the community. So that's who we're considering our stakeholders with different activities, different opportunities for engagement, different, like the staff, for instance, we need them to tell us how they operate the library and how they what they need in the library. So that's a little bit different of a conversation than maybe the full community would be able to contribute.
And how about the length of this construction time? Like that? Would it be a 2-year under construction plan or?
Approximately, yes. So we're anticipating this to be a 2-phased project, right in sequence with one another, because the library will stay in operation during construction.
Well, you can see that the nice feature of this library is that it's right in the middle of the community. Many people can walk here, bike here, all those kinds of things. But the traffic that this idea that you have would generate 200 people in an auditorium. Even if you have, now you're turning it into a greater parking area. But if you look at our little side street over here, where that house is located, that street is already under incredible traffic pressure. And the residents on that street are being so impacted by this monumental construction project. And everything around here and then after the construction is done, then you have the events that where people are parking on the sides. I mean, it's just so out of proportion to anything that seems reasonable. Maybe another area, or something like that, but I looked at it and I was just amazed that this was even considered. Because it seems so extravagant. And then when I got to the end, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is all online. If you want to direct everybody to this document, they can see everything that you're reading to us from the slides.
Mhm.
But I think that people came to this with the idea that this is started. It's been going on for a year. But I asked my neighbors, I said, have you heard about this? They all said, no. I contacted a few people who couldn't make it, especially people from Borthwick and in the condo community across the street. I know a former neighbor moved in there and she was like, oh my God, I didn't know anything about this and everything. So somehow the word hasn't gotten out to people, even that this project exists. And so it's just a shocking thing, really. And the 23 million, I have to say something about that. I can't think of a worse time in our economic history in my life of the uncertainty that communities are facing right now in terms of inflation and the whole 9 yards. And so to be asking people to take on debt, $23 million is
I agree
just
with it.
crazy.
Are there numbers as to how much individuals would be added that would have to pay additional taxes or those numbers out?
We have not done that yet. So we are very early in this. I know we've been working on this a year, but as part of that year is to build a really strong understanding over time, not to rush this
Yeah, I'd
process.
like to know how
So
much.
we just established that rough budget, the end of the planning study. So as part of the schematic design, we're starting to understand what are those things. So the information on that is part of our next steps and will be made
This is
public.
our money that
Yes.
you're spending. Governments typically like to spend money,
Yes,
and we really need to be part of that
yes,
process.
absolutely.
Like if it's 23 million, if there's any way for it to go on the points that there's they can pull it up, if there's any way the 23 can pull it down. I had a discussion with my wife recently about the salaries even specs every year. I mean, they're in the millions. Now, is that the whole network of all the libraries in this entire area?
I can't speak to the staff salaries.
I mean, there's already millions of dollars being pumped into library system. Now you're asking for another $23 billion. And apparently not a lot of people have heard about this. And this is the process that's already underway. And we're concerned that it's not, like a runaway locomotive. It's hard to stop the more information to get on that you guys get put together. That we're basically going to be sent big lines by the decision to keep going ahead. While it's being and nothing can stop it. And that's a lot of money. We're paying a lot already in library taxes, so we're very concerned.
And from your schematics that are online too, this new section would have, soaring ceilings. All I could think of was, wow, that's going to cost a lot to heat. And one of the things about this library is, as you probably noticed, what a nice atmosphere it is. Because it isn't one of these big atrium things that has that space up there doesn't do anybody anything. It might look good, but when it comes to echoing, I actually was a librarian. And so I went into the library, a brand new library in one of the schools I was in. It was gorgeous, but the sound, the echoing, it was just intolerable. Okay. And every time I see a space like that, you're going to have groups in there and it's going to be noisy. And we're going to lose all the intimacy that we have in this library.
Yeah, I'm on the board.
You are.
I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm kind of wondering,
Right, well, I
what are
want
your
to hear whatever-
responses?
Well, it's not a question answer, we're here to present, we want to get all your input.
Okay.
There's responses to all the things you said, I want to hear everyone's input, we're here to give people input.
I mean, because
And
I'm
we're-
actually in favor of this kind of aspirational expansion idea,
Sure.
just to put it out there.
So am I.
But I think it's interesting because you want to show us design concepts. When we haven't had a discussion about why are we doing this and what should we spend.
Yeah, so there was a long range planning study done 2017, 18, 19. COVID hit, obviously. So we had a contract with another architect, who did a whole bunch of analysis. We decided to procure Ashley McGraw, because her extensive experience after we reviewed a couple of architect firms. We want to move forward. The building's 50 years old. We constantly get at the Cherway community groups who want to rent more space. It's the opinion of the board that no one's stepping up to be a community center. We think the library is a perfect place to be more of a community center. We could bring in larger groups here. We're still early in the process. Suzanne said, nothing's set here. We're still early in the process. The money it is a lot of money so far. And people will get to weigh in on that. Obviously, we don't have $23 million in the bank. The library to spend on this. We have some money that we can put, but we have to do a bond. So that'll be fully vetted with the community, and we'll all get to vote on bond at some point. So, and all the meetings are online. All the meetings are publicly available. We have public comment at the beginning, at the end of every meeting. Frankly, no one shows up. Most meetings, they just don't come. They're on the schedule for next year is on the website. It's predictable. So I'm here to listen to you guys, to hear what you think. And I'm saddened for me. There's only there's not many people. But
How many people were here at the conversations?
there was there's like 10, 15 at I didn't go to the end.
It's about 10 at the afternoon as well.
Yeah.
And we really mean that we want that feedback and that we intend on working through that. So for instance, we've already heard today several comments about why are we doing this? And that just shows to me that we need to do a better job of communicating that clearly and with backup. And that is absolutely part of what we will take from this and work on to make sure that that is clear. And then from that, we can continue to build the conversation. So we don't want this to be something that you don't feel, we want this to be something that you feel like you can have those comments and that you're heard and that we'll address them. Yes.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Brian Sweeney. I used to be on the board, but I'm not now. But I am a taxpayer and parent. And I just wanted to weigh in with a thought because a couple of people have commented about sort of the question of who is using this library, who will be using it. Will people who are not paying for it be using it, or if these changes happen and things like that. And I just wanted to offer this perspective, something that I learned during my time on the board, which is that Bethlehem has a lot of readers. But we do have an intimate space that cannot house as many books as some other libraries like Washington Branch, Albany. I think Colony, the Sanford Library has a larger collection than we do. And so we are actually a net borrower, net debtor, if you like, in terms of the interlibrary borrowing that goes on in Upper Hudson. So one reason that I'm interested to see the possibility of expanding the space is that we could have the ability to have a larger collection here, be less dependent on borrowing from other libraries to make up that deficit. One thing I learned is that the library staff is very aggressively reads the collection because as new books come out, there's simply no space to put them if the books in the existing collection stick around. So just thinking about, because I think that's totally a valid concern about, will 200-person space be serving people who aren't taxpayers in the community, who are taxpayers or here? I think that's a valid question. But in terms of borrowing, I know that we are kind of a net debtor to our fellow libraries.
I was in the meeting, it's impressive to the
Yeah.
at this point. Is that, it's like, oh, this book hasn't circulated in 3 years. We can get rid of it. It's like, well, you don't know. I mean, you don't know how many books the great thing about the Troy Library, you can read anything, you can get books, you literally can get books from the Troy Library from the 60s and 70s. Okay, which you can't get stuff from like 2005 here.
Right.
Sometimes it was here.
Because
of what you're saying, because
we get complaints that people would like an author and want to read everything the author has, and we don't have. And we have like two maybe, but we don't have.
yeah, because it's finite space.
Well, I think a lot of people would be very supportive of space for a larger collection of books. And also for expanding or modifying the staff quarters for what is needed there. So I think there'd be a lot of support.
There's also, you'll see at the end of this survey or at the end of this presentation, as well as online on the website for the library, there is a survey, and it's an opportunity to contribute what your priorities are. So you all are talking about that maybe collections and staff space are most important to you. There are other of your fellow community members that might have small children. Their priority is children's space, for instance. So it's really looking at how can the library be supported to all. So accessible to all, provide for, ages 0 to 100 plus, and everywhere in between. So thinking about how can we optimize all of those needs and really support the community as a whole. So I really encourage you all to contribute to that survey. And that's how we can start to quantify what some of those needs are. We've been getting a lot of commentary, and it is difficult to quantify that and to know what are the loudest voices, where should the priorities be for this project. So we'd love all of your feedback so that we can make sure that we are responding to the needs of the community as a whole. Yeah.
I could just make one other comment. So now, as a dad, my comment as a father, one thing that I would really value in any kind of project of this kind would be incorporating a bathroom to the children's space. Currently, if you're in the children's library with your kids and they need to use the bathroom, you have to essentially exit the library to use the bathrooms in small ways. So I know that was discussed in sort of earlier iterations, but just for the record, that would be something important to me, and I think other parents.
Yes, absolutely. If I may continue, we can start looking at some of the things that are in response to things that we've heard. And again, we are early. We want your feedback so that we can refine that and, potentially right size or totally adjust and look at things that best serve your community. So I'm going to speed through this a little bit in the essence of time. We did, as I mentioned, we start with a high level purpose statement, and we look to start defining specific action items under that. Under that, are there solutions and options that we can start vetting? So we're sort of at that second or third tier of that. Some of the things that have come up, and you'll notice that this was from the planning study, a lot of these have already started to evolve, and I'll point those evolutions out. So one is to create a safer environment on the exterior. There was a lot of feedback leading to the parking being unsafe, to accommodate patrons in library activities. We also heard that some people don't know where the library is. It's not very visible. And if you come here all the time, you would know exactly where the entrance is. But if you're new to the community or a seldom visitor, you might not know. We also heard that this is to be considered the port in a storm for community members and a valued community support partner. We heard that in reference to should there be a power outage or something for an extended period of time, the library typically gets power right away. Having that space to get warm, plug in your devices, have some community time. At previous sessions, we heard that this statement is a little unclear, and we're going to work on that to make sure that what we intend by that, based on what we've heard, comes out loud and clear. Create an accessible addition that caters to the library and community program needs and accommodates multifunctional, flexible spaces and increases patron capacity within the community spaces. This number here says 400. That was very early in the planning study. All of the schemes that you'll be seeing tonight are looking at a 250 approximate capacity within the community at the largest configuration. So we're continuously refining and testing what that is. For reference on the 250, when there's an outdoor activity, that's approximately what the library can support. When there's a planned activity and the weather turns, the library has to turn more than half of those people away. So just thinking about that, there are some of those activities that happen and wanting to make sure that the library can support or can host everyone. And then another one, and again, we're continuously adding to this and refining it, but is to provide adequate space to ensure the multiple demographic needs of patrons are accommodated in functional spaces customized to their intended use and program needs, while also cohesively integrating efficient employee operational spaces. So there's a lot kind of packed in there, and part of our the way that we look at these is that's asking us to understand better the demographics of your community. So that's part of how we continue to build detail and understanding around some of those things. Okay, so in terms of where we've gone through the planning study, a brief summary of the architectural scope that we're looking at right now is an addition of community rooms, some addition to teen and children's space, and some addition to staff space. We're also looking at eliminating the mezzanine. If you're not familiar, the library has a mezzanine space just beyond the reference desk. And right now, or back when the library was built, it was intended as a double height or double decker stack space for books. So the structure is specifically designed for stack space. The library couldn't necessarily have the public going up to the second floor. The elevator and stairs is not something that is conducive to having the public go up there. So the upstairs was converted to staff space. The staff also needed more space. If you go up there, it's a sea of these structural columns for holding up book stacks, and they're maybe every 3 feet or so. So it's not an ideal space for staff. It also means that the ceiling height on the main floor is very low, and then the ceiling level of that mezzanine level is also very low. So we did look at different options for, do we replace that in kind just with a different structural element so that it's more open space? We looked at, do we raise the roof there so that we can raise the floor height there? And then we looked at, do we just take it out? Ultimately, the board and other comments that we received were in favor of taking it out to provide a 1-floor library. So 1 floor for all the community members and patrons, 1 floor for all the staff. That improves efficiency across the library operations, more safety and accessibility. So ultimately, that's where that landed. And then full interior renovation and reimagining of the existing space. So some of that is related to functionality, adaptability, flexibility over time. We also, I don't know if you can feel it in this space, but there's a really high humidity level. So some of the MEP systems in this building need some refinement. So looking at what that could be as part of that renovation, and just providing a space that is more conducive to some of the additional space and programs that the library is looking for, and then new site and parking configuration. So with that, I'm going to jump into where we're at now with the design. Again, this is in response to the feedback that we've gotten throughout the process, as well as was stated about the previous studies. And we're at a point where we're early in this process, so we'd love all of that feedback, but it's also sometimes really helpful to have something to respond to. So it's good to see something on paper and you can say, I don't know how that feels, or that's just right, or anywhere in between. So I'm going to just kind of jump into this. So we're going to start with the site plan. So the existing library footprint is this lighter orange piece here. So Delaware Avenue is right here, Borthwick is here. And you can see this sort of dotted white line here. That's denoting the existing footprint of the library. And then this darker orange is the addition space. Kind of then looking at the site, the split the middle concept that we talked about is pushing the addition into this zone. A couple of things that this does. One is it provides 2 really prominent entry points to the library. Some of the feedback we got is that from a proximity to parking and ADA parking spots, it's a little bit difficult to get to the entry. So kind of trying to get those a little bit closer, as well as just providing more space more circulation in the entry piece so that there's clear kind of circulation through the building. Another aspect that this does is it starts to divide the parking into slightly smaller zones. Some of the feedback we heard was that the parking is a little chaotic, seems to be a little bit dangerous, that people can speed through the parking lot without anything that kind of slows them down. So wanting to kind of enhance some security. Something that you'll notice about the parking is that the existing entrance is here. So we're looking at maintaining that existing entrance. But currently you have an exit only right here approximately, and it's a one-way traffic through the site. We're looking at having two-way traffic and only one entry and exit point, one and the same. We've heard a lot of feedback that we can study what's the location of this. We'll look at what are the pros and cons in articulating what the pros and cons are between a one-way and two-way traffic pattern. A couple of features within the parking is one here is a book pickup zone. So there's a loop here. It can also be if you're dropping somebody off who can't walk through the parking lot, you want to drop them off for an event, there's close drop-off location there. And then coming through the parking, there's it's called a speed table so that acts to kind of denote where pedestrians will be crossing and also acts to slow down traffic. We're also looking at, as you kind of come to the back of the site, that this becomes the service access. So currently the service entry maintenance garage is pretty prominent and adjacent to the main entry. So trying to decouple those a little bit so that it's clear. We've heard some feedback about patrons trying to come in the garage entry. So really trying to make it clear in terms of wayfinding as well as presence of the library. And then also housing some things like dumpster and the shed back here. Currently the shed is kind of out in the middle, it's very exposed. So trying to keep those elements public versus library facing separate. Let's see. So, and then lastly, one thing we're looking at as we develop the site is what do we do with stormwater management? So looking at, among other aspects that we're studying right now, maybe this is a rain garden of sorts. It's in a place where it's a little large enough to do that, but it's also not in a place where people might want to cross the traffic lane to go sit there or something. So it's a good location. This design also increases the number of parking spaces by approximately 35, 38, something like that. We're still refining that and studying that, but looking to increase parking. This also still maintains green space around the library, looking at, just kind of a facelift of some of those, as well as purposeful placement of that in relationship to some community events that might be outside. So kind of you have that now. So looking at making sure that we maintain some of that. A little bit zoomed in for you to see a little bit better. So one of the activities that we have a little bit later is we'd love your feedback. So these are some thought starters and some feedback that you might be able to contribute to us. But we're open. We'd love to have any of your other comments, ideas, concerns, questions. So after the presentation, there's some sticky paper, post-it notes up here that you can contribute some ideas to. So, but a couple of thought starters. What are your concerns for traffic patterns, parking, and general navigation? Do you feel the proposed landscape design has enhanced the user experience and connection to the outdoors? Why or why not? What connections does the library have to its natural surroundings, and why does it value green space? And what 3 words should describe the feeling of arriving at the library? There's a couple of ideas that we'd love to hear your feedback on. So I'm going to move to the interior. And this is a sketch that we worked on early on in trying to just bring you along in how architects and designers start to think about space and what we consider in how we lay out and organize program spaces. So we had our program list and we roughly divided them into community space, staff space, the main library, and the children's library. I know that there's a lot of other spaces that are part of each of those, but roughly understanding those categories. Then we also looked at, what is public space, what is private space, what are loud activities, quiet activities, what are kind of open and on display versus private, and all of the gradient in between, and how can we best lay out the library to function best. So for instance, right now, when you come in, the children's library is pretty close to the entry, but there's not a lot of definition between the spaces, and just thinking about how can we improve upon some of those aspects of, runaway children or the noise that happens when there's an event, things like that. So this concept is dovetail in the sense that we're looking at this prominent main piece here with the entry point, the lobby, and the community spaces is that sort of keystone to the library. Then when you come in, looking at how should these programs be laid out. So looking at children and youth libraries in this zone, a couple things this is looking to do is one, it's tucking it a little bit into a nook so that it has a definition to the area that it has. Also, it's kind of on this new facade of the library. So being able to come to the library on that point and see the activity of the children and kind of see what's going on in the library. But then also having it close to the entry point so that parents with young children have an easy access. They're not tracking their loud little ones through the library. And then also kind of looking at what is this zone here between the main library and the children's library. We'll get to that in a little bit. And then also, of course, the main library. So as you bridge between the community public circulation zone into the main library, what is that first experience? So here, wanting to extend the appropriate materials as far to the entry as possible so that when you come in, you see library collections, that you see something that says this is the library, and then working back further into this space, there's a gradient from maybe more prominent space to maybe focused resources and community to quiet or study reading spaces. Then we also have staff on either side. The reason for this is that throughout the stakeholder investigations we've had, determined a couple things. One is that about half the library staff is very patron public facing. They're the ones that you engage with when you come here for circulation or reference needs. They make sure that you get all the help that you need. Then the other part of this staff is more internally focused. They make sure that the facility runs, that the technology runs, that the place is cleaned up, and that you have the furniture that you need for a community event. They also are the ones that are moving books around as things come and go from the library. So kind of roughly dividing those patron facing versus internal facing staff. And then we also looked at what is that located to the adjacencies on the site and the rest of the library. So I mentioned earlier on the site, we have the book pickup here. So needing staff resources close to that location for visibility and the books on hold. And then on the other side, having access to that maintenance area. So that's where things are received in. They're sorted by the staff that are here. And then these are also staff members that really are just making sure the library runs. So that's roughly how we've looked at organizing the spaces in the library. We did look at other options where the children's library is more in the back and the main library is more in the front. And there was a lot of conversation about how it's difficult for children you don't necessarily want them trace being through the entire library. But then also wanting to make sure that's kind of where this keystone piece came together, or I apologize, dovetail piece came together, extending that main library piece to the front entry and making that the prominent first point of access. So moving into what that looks like a little bit more as I mentioned that part of the process is to gain more understanding and detail around the program needs. So we start to test fit this. So in terms of what size are these additions, we're looking at what are the different spaces, how many, how big, and starting to lay them out. And that starts to define the size of the spaces. So you can start to see what these look like, and I'll go into each one in a little bit more detail. What we'll first look at is the community spaces. And this slide is showing the two options that we've looked at narrowing it down to. So this zone here and this zone here are two options for the project. They're named B1 and C1 because we also had an A, we had a D and E, and it was narrowed down to determine what was the best need. So The option on the left shows a slightly larger addition that has more community rooms, and then the option on the right is a slightly smaller one with fewer community rooms. So diving into that, a little bit of background. So your existing community spaces available for community program are the room that you're in now, the community room, and the one next door, the boardroom. So this room that you're in is 1,600 square feet at max capacity, with everyone in rows of chairs is about 109. A lot of the activities, if you were to pack 109 people in here, it'll feel pretty crowded. It'd be great if we had 100 people here contributing, but it would feel pretty crowded. And then also, if you think about different events that occur, tables or rows of chairs are not always the optimal configuration. So knowing how many or exploring how many people can fit in a space with different configurations. And then the boardroom is much smaller. So you're looking around 45 or so, 49 people in that space at max capacity. If you've been in there or observed a board meeting, I don't know how that many would actually fit in. That's kind of a fire code max capacity. So the actual usable space of that is more in that 20-ish or 25 range. So looking at, if you wanted to host an event here, you're kind of limited by, these are the two spaces. And we're working on collecting data to determine what are the primary sizes and how the frequency of community events, and what is the rate of refusal, essentially, how often are people turned away because there's just not room at that event or room in the building to host that event. Couple things we talked about with the library staff is that the most frequent request is for an event that has 35 people. So we've started looking at 35 as a rule of thumb to talk about how can we build on that as sort of a module. So 35 in tables and chairs, so that it's a little bit more conducive to some of the activities that happen at that scale. What is the optimal configuration or proportion of that room? And then can we start stacking some of those together so that it becomes flexible? So thinking about each of these little boxes you see here are what we're calling the small room, and that would be 35 people at tables and chairs. If you had rows of chairs, it would increase that capacity. Then there'd be a medium room. So all of these red dashed lines, we're looking at potential operable partitions so that you can maximize the flexibility and adaptability of these spaces. So at a given time, you could have in this configuration 4 small meetings going on at the same time, or events, or you could have 2 medium or any combination thereof, or 1 large event. So the large room with all of the operable partitions up would host that 250 person space in rows of chairs, which would, at that size, is likely what some of that would be. Other events that might happen is maybe it's a career fair or a tabling event where people are coming to interact with different people at tables. So the different configurations are things that we're exploring and testing. Between the two options, it's looking at, is it 4 small rooms? So this kind of block right here is identical to this block right here, same size and such, versus adding 2 more onto here. So this would be for a total of 6 versus 4. Another thing that we're looking at is when there is an event of 250 people in rows of chairs, that is a lot of setup for the staff of the library to set up. It also means that when that session is not happening, where do all those chairs go? So one of the things that we're looking at is having telescoping seating that would provide about 1/3 of that seating. Looking at, maybe it's 1/2, maybe it's 1/3. That takes, in its closed position, takes up about 4 feet of floor space, but when it's out, it would serve about 1/2 or 1/3 of the seating. And then the rest of the seating would be loose chairs on the floor. If the telescoping seating is something that is selected, it would go here in this option or here in this option. And then the divider panel or divider wall that's here would likely not be recommended because it kind of has some conflicts between the telescoping seating and the divider wall. So you would end up with, in that case, maybe 2 small here, 1 medium, and 2 small here for a total of 5 in that option. Hopefully that made sense. I'm happy to answer questions about that. So those are the two options for the community edition that we're looking at. And some of the feedback we're looking for is how big, how many of these rooms. We are working, as I said, on collecting data for how frequently they're used, what types of events, and how often people are turned away. But looking at that 250 capacity space is kind of where we've over multiple conversations, starting at that 400, going and looking at different options is roughly where that's going. Again, kind of linking that to the outdoor space that you have now. So also for just kind of showcasing what that means for different furniture configurations, there's just two examples. I think the options are endless, but showing the difference between rows of chairs and the capacity of the rooms versus tables and chairs and the capacities of the rooms. Just to give you a little sense of what some of those things are, the telescoping seating, here's a couple of examples. The idea is that it looks like auditorium seating, but it retracts into the wall similar to bleachers in a gym per se. Another conversation is, should there be a stage within that space? We've heard that if the room is full of people on the floor, that the presenter or if it's a quartet or something like that, they might want a little bit of height so that everybody can see them. If you have the telescoping seating, is that still needed? Is that not needed? That's part of, we're still working through. We'd love some feedback on that. And then should a stage be needed, then what type is it? One option is to do a fixed stage. I think we are looking to eliminate that as an option because there's needs a lot of floor space. It's very fixed and not flexible and adaptable. So for a more flexible option, these three options, maybe it comes out of the floor, hydraulic lift, maybe it comes out of the wall, or maybe it's just a little modular stage that's almost like furniture and you store away when not in use. So looking at options, looking at, what is needed for that. So a couple of thought starters on the community space as you're thinking about what you've seen and some of the feedback we'd love to hear is, what new opportunities do you see for programming that exist that the existing space cannot support? How can the library better serve as a community resource? Which options best support the needs of the library and local community? And do you see value in prioritizing higher cost items over other potential library features? That's specifically looking at telescoping seating, the operable partitions, how many of those. I think it's balancing the value of the solution to the cost and investment of that and the long-term use and flexibility of the spaces. So some things to consider. Again, would love whatever thoughts you have to share. So next space is the main library or traditional materials. So that's that blue piece in there. So coming in from the main lobby here, looking at what is the first thing that you see and looking at is potentially stack space and display space for new books, periodicals, large print, some of those things that people have as destination collections right now. So kind of being more front and center to the library. Then as you move back, having this zone fiction collection, and then nonfiction collection towards this zone here. Throughout the space, looking at other aspects. So looking at a library of things here to support that program element, as well as computer stations here that the library helps users with. Also looking at, I'll back up here, this is the circulation desk here, a reference desk here, and then just looking ahead a little, the children's reference desk would be approximately here. So sort of creating that triangle of support for patrons. And then also looking at quiet reading, quiet study spaces along the window zones, as well as what you currently have for tutoring or small meeting space in the library. You have four spaces. Those are always full. Every time I'm here, they're totally full with students studying, with tutoring spaces, other people utilizing those. So this plan is proposing 12 of those spaces. I think it's one of the most commonly sought out spaces on a daily basis. So making sure that the library can support more of that. Also in this space, you'll see down here at the bottom, the library currently has a little bit of a maker space type equipment and opportunity, but they don't have the space for it. So the library is looking at, can there be a space that's multi-purpose for adult programming, library-driven adult programming? So maybe it's a maker space with equipment, maybe it's a space for a quilting club or other activities like that that doesn't necessarily need to be in the community space. Feedback on that is that then that would be specifically for library programming. One of the concerns that we've heard is that anytime there's library programming in this space, the community doesn't have access to it. So wanting to make sure that both can function at the same time. So that is the traditional materials in terms of where we are in the design as of now. One thing I didn't point out is this zone right here. That is the existing skylight that's over the reference desk, and looking to understand what is the best use of that space. It is pretty prominent. There's a lot of great daylighting there. Housing stacks under that, we've heard different concerns from if stacks would be hogging the natural light that people want. We've also heard that natural light and daylighting is not so great for books. So looking at, can this instead, what we're proposing is this as sort of the library living room. So some lounge furniture, some table space for activities, also intermixing some stacks, maybe some periodicals, so you can grab a magazine and sit down and read there, interact with some other patrons. But this is a more sort of social living room of the library in contrast to some of the more quiet zones throughout. Okay, next so a couple thought starters. Opportunities do you see for adult offering in 10 to 20 years? How do you envision the libraries patrons making use of the library? What concerns do you have? And what does modernizing the library mean to you? And then lastly, we have the children and youth library. A lot of the feedback that we've heard is that the children's library is just simply not big enough. That weeding concept that you talked about earlier is constantly happening in the children's library, so that when you think about the different age ranges of children and what's appropriate materials for them, there's not a huge selection for them. Also needing a lot of kind of open floor space for activities. But then when there is an activity, it may be too loud and is distracting to the rest of the library. So in looking at that, creating a larger zone for the children's library, also providing much more space for the teen area. Right now, the teen area is essentially a couple of stacks and a little bit of lounge and study space, very small, very much on kind of a main circulation route. So it's a little bit underserving the teens right now. So looking to make them just as important of a user group. The reference desk here. So you come in the main library through one of these portals. So the portals here are looking at providing some definition between the space without enclosing the space. So wanting to have the free flowing activity, but also limiting that in some regards. So having a buffer for, again, that runaway child or something, but also if you have a double stroller, you don't want to be dealing with doors. So we're looking at ways to optimize that entry point. And then also looking at when you come in here, so children's stacks along here, a play area and reading area along here. You'll also see here is an enclosed room for children's activities. So crafts that are really messy, that are really noisy. Right now there isn't a space for that. So looking to accommodate that in a way that doesn't bother the rest of the library. And then again, in the teen area, stacks, lounge, and study. And then the teens right now also do not have a space to call their own. So this might be something where it's SAT prep in a formal sense. Maybe it's a chess club, maybe it's a gaming console for those ideas. And then again, it's kind of separated out to prevent noise or distractions, going both ways. So that is the children and youth area and where the design is looking at the moment. So some thought starters based on what you've seen. What new opportunities do you see for children and youth offerings that the existing library can't support? And how could you use the crafting and multi-use rooms to expand programming? In 10 to 20 years, how do you envision children and teens utilizing the library? What concerns do you have for the proposed plan and utilization of the space? And how can the library better provide resources to families with children of all ages? So I know that I did present quite a bit of information and design. If we go back to the original goals, part of this was to inform you of the process and where things stand now. But then really what we'd like is that feedback. So we've had some great conversation thus far. This survey is available on the library website. You can also, it's a QR code. If you want to hold your phone up, it'll bring you to that website. We'd love that feedback. It's also where there's some of those questions are around prioritizing what you believe to be the most important for this project and your needs for the community. There's some other aspects in there that we'd love your feedback on. So with that, I can take questions, but I'd also have these 4 activity zones around the room. So I'll explain them briefly and then we can kind of do questions. So there's site up here, traditional materials there, children and youth there, and the community room here. So it's the boards are displaying the layout that was presented, and then the thought starters and some post-it paper is here. We'd love your feedback on the thought starters or anything else that you'd like to share. There's also a lot of images for each space type. These are really just a huge compilation across the board of different things. We'd like to start knowing what flavor of architectural design or features that you like or dislike. So if you have comments on any of the images, you can share them on the post-it and stick it on the image. So just to start getting into your minds on what you imagine to be the look of this library. So with that, I'd love some questions. Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. Just have one question. Given all the changes that are being proposed in both of these models, you've already spoken to children's library that have greater capacity for collections. What would be the impact on what is it called, additional material collection space with these 2 models that are being?
So the traditional materials collections would also increase. I apologize, we had that data on them in our last presentation and it didn't end up on these, but it is increasing in size. So across the board, all program areas are increasing because of the need of the capacity of the current library versus the programs that are hoped for or currently not being possible. So all collection space is increasing. Yes.
Two things I noticed missing from community space, which I gather where it would be, is first the public television studio, and if that's just going to go away. And the other thing is any kind of intentional space for visual art exhibition.
Great questions. So for the first one, in terms of the recording space, the idea we looked at is that in the maker space is that separate space. And what we've looked at so far is that one of the larger study tutoring spaces will be outfit to perform like a recording studio so that then it's more multifunctional. So the walls will have acoustic qualities to them. The technology will be set up in there. So that space is not utilized as that very often. I don't know if that's a product of just where it's located or something like that, but that when it's not being used that way, it can function as a study room. So it will be one of the study rooms within the library. And then your second question on gallery space, I'm going to go back to. In both of these options, we're looking at, so here's kind of the main circulation zone. We're imagining maybe there's some furniture, computer, technology touchdown zones, things like that. And then you'll see that there's this circulation path around the community spaces in both options. So there's potential gallery space within this zone, as well as the full perimeter of this space. And looking at that to create some nooks and crannies for people that want to kind of just have a private space. We can do some interesting things with daylighting in those zones. Another thing that this kind of ring creates is a buffer between the exterior and the interior. So the exterior of the library, the facade, a lot of the comments that we've gotten is that it should feel light and welcoming and transparent. That doesn't exactly jive with community spaces. Sometimes you need the wall space for pinning things up or having display. But then also some of the concerns we heard early on was about safety and security of the library. So not only does this ring provide that transparency on the outside while a little bit of opacity on the inside. It's also a buffer so that the space where all the community members are is not as exposed and on display should there be an event that you want to hide out from. So this is kind of that ring around it is acting as probably 4 different functions at least that we've kind of thought about so far. So gallery space, nooks and crannies for reading space, that buffer space, and a layer of security as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
The new plan, outline, you're going to be losing the access to Delaware Ave on the south side.
Yes, so that entry point will remain, but it'll be staff entry point as well as access for the adult maker space to have access to the exterior should there be some sort of equipment or activity that wants outdoor. But yes, any pedestrian access would be rerouted to. So rather than coming in. So rather than coming in here, it'd be looking at coming in this direction.
Do you have data on how much current Delaware Avenue access you suspect? Should clarify. One of the wonderful things about Del Mar is the walkable community and library is very accessible. Walking, very easy to come in that door on Delaware Avenue. Putting all the access down on the north side would significantly restrict that accessibility.
That's a great comment, and I think we can gather that data on how what the frequency of use is from the Delaware entry versus the parking lot entry. And I think maybe that also starts to talk about there is some pathways along here. Maybe the pathways are extended with access, and we can look at how that mixes with the book pickup, things like that, so that pedestrians can kind of skip the corner there a little bit. Yeah.
For instance, bus stops right outside, and so it's walkable access, very convenient for everybody on the south side of the library. Losing that access, they would be more inclined to drive.
Yeah.
That's an impact.
Yeah, we can do some data collection there, as well as maybe it's a little bit of just making sure that the route is more accessible this way. Or maybe we look at that there still needs to be an access point. That's great feedback.
I was seconding that. Some accounting needs to be made, but I think that's very popular way to access the library. The crosswalk there, it's rather safe place to cross Delaware. There's some other points.
Okay, so Deanna and I will be here if you have any questions, but I'd love your feedback on these boards or just to take a closer look. Thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks.